Priya was the kind of girl nobody noticed. She walked through the hallways of Lincoln Middle School like a ghost. Her eyes always fixed on the floor, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. She never raised her hand in class. She never spoke unless a teacher called her name directly. And even then, her voice came out so soft that teachers often asked her to repeat herself. Most of the time, she just shook her head and said nothing at all. She was 14 years old. She had perfected the art of being invisible. Every morning, she arrived at school exactly 5 minutes before the first bell. Not too early, because that would mean standing alone in the hallway while other kids laughed and talked in groups. Not too late, because that would draw attention. She had calculated the perfect timing to slip into her seat without anyone noticing. Her classmates did not dislike her. That would have required them to think about her at all. She was simply not on their radar. When teachers assigned group projects, Priya was always the last one picked. Not because anyone had anything against her, but because they genuinely forgot she existed. She would stand there waiting while teams formed around her. Eventually, some group would realize they needed one more person, and someone would wave her over without enthusiasm. Lunch was the hardest part of the day. The cafeteria was loud and chaotic, filled with the sounds of trays clattering and kids shouting across tables. Priya hated it. For the first few weeks of 6th grade, she had tried to find a place to sit. She would carry her tray around the room looking for an empty spot, feeling everyone's eyes on her, even though nobody was actually looking. It was exhausting. By the middle of that first year, she discovered the library. It was quiet there. The librarian, a kind old woman with gray hair and reading glasses, never asked questions. Priya would sit in the corner with a book and eat her sandwich in peace. No one bothered her. No one even knew she was there. That became her routine. Classroom, library, classroom, home. Her music teacher, Mrs. Burton, had given up on her a long time ago. In the beginning, Mrs. Burton had tried to include her. She would call on Priya during music appreciation class, asking simple questions about rhythm or melody. But Priya's answers were so quiet, so hesitant, that Mrs. Burton eventually stopped trying. It was easier to focus on the students who actually participated. During choir practice, Priya stood in the back row and mouthed the words. She never actually sang. She opened and closed her lips at the right moments. But no sound came out. Mrs. Burton noticed this once and asked her about it. Priya turned bright red and stared at the floor. After that, Mrs. Burton let it go. Some kids just were not meant to perform, she decided. There was no point in pushing when the spring talent assembly was announced. Mrs. Burton started organizing the student performances. She walked around the music room with a clipboard, assigning roles based on who volunteered and who she thought could handle the pressure of performing in front of the whole school. There were singers, dancers, a small band, and a piano solo. Mrs. Burton matched each act with a student who had the skill and the confidence to pull it off. She did not even glance at Priya. Later that week, Mrs. Burton met with the principal to discuss the assembly lineup. They went through the list of performers one by one. When they reached the end, the principal looked up and asked if everyone had been included. Everyone who wanted to participate, Mrs. Burton said. Some students just are not interested. What about the quiet ones? The principal asked. Sometimes they surprise you. Mrs. Burton thought for a moment. An image of Priya came to her mind. That girl who sat in the back and never spoke? The one who mouthed the words during choir? There is one girl, Mrs. Burton said slowly. Priya, but she is too shy to perform. Honestly, I think she would probably faint if I put her on stage. She can barely speak in class. There is no way she could handle an audience. Fair enough, we cannot force anyone. And that was the end of it. Priya's name was crossed off before it had even been written down. But here is the thing about Priya that nobody knew. Here is the secret she carried with her every single day, hidden beneath her silence and her downcast eyes. She could play the piano, not just play it. She could make it sing. She could make it cry. She could sit down at a keyboard and create something so beautiful that it would make you forget to breathe. Every day. After school, Priya walked home to a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. The elevator was always broken, so she climbed the stairs. The hallway smelled like cooking spices and laundry detergent. She would unlock the door, drop her backpack by the couch, and walk straight to the corner of the living room there. Pushed. Against the wall beneath a window with faded curtains sat an old upright piano. It was not a fancy instrument. The wood was scratched and worn. A few of the keys stuck if you pressed them too hard. But to Priya, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She would sit on the bench, close her eyes, and play for hours, until her fingers ached, until the sky outside turned dark and her mother came home from work. The piano had belonged to her grandmother, Nani, she called her. Nani had been the one to teach Priya how to play. Starting when Priya was just 5 years old, Nani would sit beside her on the bench and guide her tiny fingers across the keys. She taught her scales, then simple songs, then pieces that grew more and more complex as the years went on. Nani had seen something in Priya that nobody else could see. A gift, a spark. She told Priya that music was a language, and that some people were born knowing how to speak it. "You have magic in your hands," Nani used to say. "Do not ever let anyone take that away from you." Priya believed her. When she played the piano, she felt like a different person. She felt brave. She felt alive. The shyness that choked her in the outside world disappeared completely. It was just her and the music, flowing through her like water. But then, 3 years ago, Nani got sick. It happened fast. One month she was teaching Priya a new piece by Chopin. The next month, she was gone. The funeral was held on a rainy afternoon. Priya sat in the front row and did not cry. She could not. The grief was too big, too heavy. It sat inside her chest like a stone, pressing down on her lungs, making it hard to breathe. After that, everything changed. Priya stopped playing in front of anyone. She could not bear it. Every time she sat at the piano with someone else in the room, she saw Nani's empty chair beside her. She heard Nani's voice saying, "Beautiful, beautiful." The pain would rise up so fast that she had to stop. So she made a rule. She would only play alone. In the quiet of the apartment, with the door closed and the world shut out, her mother worked double shifts at the hospital and was rarely home. The neighbors kept to themselves. Nobody heard Priya play. Nobody knew what she could do. At school, she was the invisible girl who never talked. At home, she was something else entirely, and she planned to keep it that way forever. The apartment was always quiet. When Priya came home from school, her mother left for work before sunrise and often did not return until late at night. She was a nurse at the city hospital, and the shifts were long and unpredictable. Sometimes she worked days, sometimes she worked nights. Sometimes she worked both, back to back, just to make sure the bills got paid on time. Priya understood. She never complained. She had learned to take care of herself a long time ago. Every afternoon followed the same pattern. She would climb the 3 flights of stairs, unlock the door, and step into the small apartment that smelled faintly of her mother's perfume and the incense they burned on weekends. She would make herself a snack, usually just toast with butter or a bowl of instant noodles. Then she would sit at the piano and lose herself completely. The world outside disappeared when she played. The loneliness faded. The silence that followed her through the school hallways melted away. There was only the music, rising and falling like waves. Filling every corner of the room, she played pieces her grandmother had taught her. Old classical compositions that Nani had loved.
Beethoven's Moonlight
Sonata, Bach's Prelude in C major, Chopin's Nocturnes. These pieces carried memories inside them. Every note reminded Priya of her grandmother's hands, her grandmother's voice, her grandmother's smile. But Priya did not stop there. After Nani passed away, she kept learning on her own. She watched tutorial videos online, studying the way professional pianists move their fingers. She downloaded sheet music and practiced until she could play it perfectly. She taught herself pieces that were far beyond her age level, pieces that most students did not attempt until they were in music conservatories. Debussy's Clair de Lune, Liszt's Liebestraum, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. She played them all, alone. In the quiet of the empty apartment, sometimes, late at night, her mother would come home and hear the faint echo of music drifting from Priya's room. She would pause at the door, listening, a tired smile on her face. but she never interrupted. She knew how much the piano meant to her daughter. She knew it was Priya's way of staying connected to Nani. Once her mother had suggested that Priya take lessons again. Maybe join a music program at school, maybe even perform somewhere. Priya had shaken her head so fast that the conversation ended right there. "I only play for myself," she said quietly. "That is enough." Her mother did not push. She had learned that pushing Priya only made her retreat further into herself. So she let it go, hoping that someday, when Priya was ready, she would share her gift with the world. At school, nobody had any idea what Priya could do. To her classmates, she was just the quiet girl who never spoke. The one who sat alone in the library during lunch. The one who seemed to blend into the walls. There was one person, though, who noticed Priya more than others. Her name was Kavya. She lived in the apartment right next to Priya's, separated by a thin wall that did not block much sound. Kavya was the opposite of Priya in almost every way. She was loud and cheerful, always laughing, always talking. She had a big group of friends at school and was constantly surrounded by people. But for some reason, Kavya had taken an interest in the quiet girl next door. It started in 6th grade. When Kavya's family first moved into the building, Kavya had knocked on Priya's door to introduce herself, and Priya had barely been able to make eye contact. Most people would have given up right then. But Kavya was stubborn. She kept trying. She would wave at Priya in the hallway. She would say hi at school, even when Priya only mumbled a response. She would text Priya random memes and funny videos, not expecting anything in return. Slowly, over time, something like a friendship formed between them. It was not a normal friendship. They did not hang out at school or sit together at lunch. Priya was too anxious for that. But sometimes on weekends, Kavya would come over to Priya's apartment. They would watch movies together or do homework in comfortable silence. Kavya did most of the talking, and Priya listened. It worked for both of them. Kavya was the only person at school who knew that Priya was not just shy. She was deeply, painfully afraid. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of opening her mouth and saying the wrong thing. But even Kavya did not know the full truth about Priya. She had heard the piano, of course. The walls were thin, and Priya played almost every day. At first, Kavya assumed it was a recording, some kind of classical music playlist that Priya liked to listen to. But one evening, she pressed her ear against the wall and realized the truth. The music was not coming from a speaker. It was coming from Priya's apartment. It was Liv. Kavya was stunned. She had no idea her quiet neighbor could play like that. The music was so beautiful, so emotional, that it gave her chills. She wanted to ask Priya about it, but something held her back. She sensed that this was private, sacred even. So she kept it to herself, waiting for the right moment. That moment never seemed to come. At school, the weeks passed slowly. The spring talent assembly was getting closer, and the excitement was building. Posters went up in the hallways. Announcements were made over the intercom. Everyone was talking about who was going to perform and what they were going to do. Priya ignored all of it. The talent show had nothing to do with her. She was not a performer. She was not even a participant in her own life most of the time. She was just an observer, watching from the sidelines while everyone else lived loudly one afternoon. She overheard a group of girls talking in the bathroom. They were discussing the talent show lineup, and one name kept coming up. Rina. She was a popular girl in their grade, known for being pretty and confident and good at everything. Apparently, Rina was going to play a piano solo at the assembly. Everyone was excited about it. She has been taking lessons since she was like 4, one girl said. She is so talented. I heard she's playing some really hard classical piece, another girl added. It is going to be amazing. Priya stood in the stall, frozen, listening. She knew the piece they were talking about. It was not that hard. She had learned it 2 years ago and could play it in her sleep. But she said nothing. She waited until the girls left, then slipped out quietly and went to her next class. That night, she sat at her piano for longer than usual. She played piece after piece, letting the music pour out of her. There was something restless inside her, something she could not name. A strange feeling that kept tugging at her chest. She thought about Rena, performing in front of the whole school. She thought about the applause, the cheers, the admiration. She thought about what it would feel like to be seen like that, to be heard. Then she shook her head and pushed the thought away. That was not her life. That would never be her life. She was Priya, the invisible girl. And invisible was safe. She played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note with precision and emotion. The music swelled and crashed like a storm. It was powerful. It was heartbreaking. It was everything she could not say out loud. When she finished, she sat in the silence for a long moment. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was pounding. She wished, just for a second, that someone could hear her. That someone could see the person she really was beneath all the fear and the silence. But wishing was dangerous. Wishing led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. She had learned that lesson the hard way, so she closed the piano lid, turned off the light, and went to bed. The next morning, she woke up and did it all over again. School, silence, library, home, piano, sleep, the same routine, the same invisibility. She had no idea that everything was about to change, that in just a few days, a single moment would crack open her carefully constructed world and force her to make a choice she never thought she would have to make. But for now, she was still just Priya, the girl nobody noticed, the girl with a secret so big it was bursting to get out. And somewhere, on the other side of that thin apartment wall, Kavya was listening, waiting, knowing that her quiet friend was so much more than she appeared to be. She just needed the right moment to prove it. It happened on a Tuesday. Exactly 2 weeks before the Spring Talent Assembly, Priya was sitting in the back of her math class, copying notes from the board when the announcement came over the intercom. The principal's voice crackled through the speaker, asking Mrs. Burton to come to the office immediately. A few students exchanged curious glances. Most of them shrugged it off and went back to their work. Priya did not think anything of it. Whatever was happening had nothing to do with her. Nothing ever did. But by lunchtime, the news had spread through the entire school like wildfire. Rena had broken her wrist. It happened during soccer practice that morning. She had gone for a goal, tripped over another player's foot, and landed hard on her right hand. The coach heard the crack from across the field. By the time the ambulance arrived, Rena was crying and clutching her arm, her face pale with pain. The doctors confirmed it at the hospital. A clean fracture. She would need a cast for at least 6 weeks. There was no way she could play piano at the talent show. There was no way she could play piano at all for a long time. The whole school was buzzing with the news. Rena was one of the most popular girls in their grade, and everyone felt sorry for her. But underneath the sympathy, there's another emotion spreading through the hallways. Panic. The spring. Talent Assembly was the biggest event of the year. Parents came. Local newspapers sometimes covered it. The principal had been promoting it for months, and the piano solo was supposed to be the highlight of the show. It was the closing act, the grand finale. Without it, the whole program would feel incomplete. Mrs. Burton was in crisis mode. Priya heard the teachers talking about it in the hallway after lunch. Mrs. Burton was pacing back and forth outside the music room. Her clipboard clutched to her chest, her face tight with stress. "We have 2 weeks," she was saying to another teacher. 2 weeks to find someone who can play a classical piece on piano? Do you know how hard that is? Most of these kids can barely play chopsticks. The other teacher shook her head sympathetically. "Maybe you could cut the piano solo from the program?" "I cannot do that," Mrs. Burton said. The principal specifically requested it. "He wants something impressive, something that shows off our music program. If I cut the piano solo, it will look like we have nothing to offer." Priya kept walking, her head down, pretending she had not heard anything. It was not her problem. She had nothing to do with the talent show. She was just going to the library, same as always. But the conversation stayed with her all afternoon. She could not stop thinking about it. A piano solo. A classical piece. 2 weeks to prepare? She could do it. She knew she could. She had dozens of pieces memorized, pieces that were far more difficult than anything Rena had been planning to play. She could walk into that auditorium and perform something that would leave everyone speechless. But the thought of actually doing it made her stomach twist into knots. Standing on that stage, hundreds of eyes watching her, the silence before the first note, the judgment, the expectation, no, she could not do it. She would rather disappear into the floor than put herself through that. She pushed the thought out of her mind and focused on getting through the rest of the day. The next morning, Mrs. Burton made an announcement in music class. She stood at the front of the room, looking tired and frustrated, and explained the situation. Rena was injured. The piano solo was in jeopardy. She needed to find a replacement as soon as possible. If anyone here can play piano at an intermediate or advanced level, please see me after class, she said. This is a serious performance. I need someone who can handle the pressure. The room was silent. A few students glanced at each other, but nobody raised their hand. Most of them could not play piano at all. The few who could were not confident enough to volunteer for something this big. Mrs. Burton sighed. Anyone? This is your chance to shine. The whole school will be watching. Still nothing. The silence stretched on, awkward and heavy. Priya stared at her desk, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. A voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Say something. Raise your hand. This is your chance." But her body would not move. Her hand stayed glued to her lap. Her mouth stayed shut, and then, from across the room, someone spoke. Priya can play. The voice was clear and confident. It cut through the silence like a knife. Every head in the room turned. Priya felt her face go hot. Her heart stopped. It was Kavya. She was sitting a few rows ahead, her hand raised, looking directly at Mrs. Burton. Priya can play piano, Kavya said again. She is really good. Like really, really good. Mrs. Burton frowned. She looked at Kavya, then at Priya, as if trying to remember who Priya even was. Priya, she repeated slowly. The quiet girl in the back? Kavya nodded. Yes, I have heard her play. She lives next door to me. She practices every day, and she is incredible. I am not exaggerating. She is better than anyone I have ever heard. The whole class was staring at Priya now. She wanted to sink into the floor. She wanted to vanish. Her face was burning red, and her hands were trembling under the desk. Mrs. Burton walked down the aisle toward her. Priya, is this true? Do you play piano? Priya could not speak. Her throat was closed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She is just shy, Kavya said quickly. But trust me, Mrs. Burton, she can do this. You should hear her play Chopin. It is unbelievable. Mrs. Burton studied Priya for a long moment. There was doubt in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. She was desperate, and desperate people were willing to take chances. Priya, she said gently, I need you to tell me the truth. Can you play piano? At an advanced level? Priya's mind was racing. She could lie. She could say no, shake her head, and this whole nightmare would be over. Kavya would look foolish, but things would go back to normal. She could stay invisible. She could stay safe. But something inside her hesitated. A small voice, buried deep beneath the fear, was whispering something different. This is what Nani wanted. She wanted you to share your gift. She believed in you. Priya looked up at Mrs. Burton. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes, I can play. The room erupted in murmurs. Students whispered to each other, surprised and skeptical. The quiet girl who never talked could play piano? Since when? Mrs. Burton held up her hand for silence. Okay, Priya. I am going to give you a chance. But I need to hear you play first. Can you come to the auditorium after school today for an audition? Priya's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to say no, to back out, to run. But she thought of her grandmother. She thought of all those hours spent at the piano alone, playing for no one. She thought of the music trapped inside her, waiting to be heard, and she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I will be there. Mrs. Burton gave her a small smile. Good, I will see you at 3:30. She walked back to the front of the room and continued with the lesson, but Priya did not hear a word of it. Her mind was spinning. What had she just agreed to? What was she thinking? After class, Kavya rushed over to her. Priya, I am so sorry. I should have asked you first. But I could not just sit there and say nothing. You are so talented and no one knows it. This is your chance. Priya shook her head, her eyes wet with tears she was trying not to let fall. I cannot do this, Kavya. I cannot play in front of people. You do not understand. I do understand, Kavya said softly. I know you are scared. But I also know what I have heard through that wall. You have something special, Priya. Something amazing. And you cannot keep hiding it forever. Priya wiped her eyes. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if everyone laughs at me? Kavya took her hand. Then I will be right there in the front row, cheering for you anyway. But you are not going to mess up. I know you are not. Priya did not say anything. She just stood there, trembling, feeling like her whole world had been turned upside down in the span of 5 minutes. She had spent 3 years building walls around herself. 3 years hiding. 3 years convincing herself that being invisible was better than being seen, and now, with one sentence from her only friend, those walls were starting to crack. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Priya could not focus on anything. She kept glancing at the clock, watching the minutes tick by, feeling the dread build in her chest. By the time the final bell rang, she felt like she was going to be sick. She walked to the auditorium on shaky legs. The hallway was empty. Her footsteps echoed off the walls. When she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside, the room felt enormous. Rows and rows of empty seats stretched out before her, and at the far end of the stage sat a grand piano. Gleaming under the lights, Mrs. Burton was already there. Sitting in the front row with her clipboard, she looked up when Priya entered. Good, you came, she said. I was not sure you would. Priya did not respond. She walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes fixed on the piano. It looked beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Go ahead, Mrs. Burton said. Whenever you are ready. Priya climbed the steps to the stage. Her legs felt like they were made of water. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys, and then she froze. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Priya sat at the piano, fingers resting on the keys, but she could not move. Her hands were shaking. Her mind had gone completely blank. She could feel Mrs. Burton's eyes on her from the front row, watching, waiting. The pressure was suffocating. She tried to remember the pieces. She had practiced 1,000 times. Chopin, Debussy, Beethoven. The notes were somewhere in her brain, but she could not reach them. It was like there was a wall between her and the music, a wall made of fear and panic and the crushing weight of being watched. Seconds passed. They felt like hours. Mrs. Burton shifted in her seat. Priya heard the clipboard tap against the armrest. She knew what was coming. Mrs. Burton was going to stand up and tell her it was okay. She did not have to do this, that they would find someone else. And part of Priya wanted that. Part of her wanted to run off the stage and never look back. But another part of her, small and stubborn part, refused to give up. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The auditorium faded away. The empty seats disappeared. Mrs. Burton's impatient gaze melted into nothing. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, Priya saw her grandmother. Nani was sitting beside her on the piano bench, just like she used to. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was smiling that warm, gentle smile that Priya remembered so well. She could almost smell her grandmother's perfume. That faint scent of jasmine and sandalwood that always clung to her clothes. Play for me, little bird, Nani whispered. Do not think about them. Just play for me. Priya felt something shift inside her chest. The fear was still there, but it was not alone anymore. There was something else now, something stronger. Love, memory. The echo of her grandmother's voice, telling her she had magic in her hands. She opened her eyes, her fingers found the keys, and she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated into the air, soft and delicate, like the opening of a story. Priya's hands moved on their own, guided by years of practice and something deeper than muscle memory. She was not thinking anymore. She was feeling. The music flowed through her like a river. Carrying all the emotions she had kept locked inside for so long, the piece grew in intensity. The melody swelled and dipped, building toward its powerful middle section. Priya's fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note with precision and passion. She played the way she played at home, alone in her room, when no one was listening. She played like she was having a conversation with her grandmother, telling her everything she could not say in words. The auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Burton sat frozen in her seat. Her clipboard had slipped from her hands and fallen to the floor, but she did not notice. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. She had been teaching music for over 20 years. She had heard hundreds of students perform, but she had never heard anything like this. This was not just skill. This was something else. Something raw and real and heartbreakingly beautiful. Priya reached the climax of the piece. The section where the music crashes like a wave against the shore. Her whole body was moving with the rhythm, swaying slightly on the bench. Tears were streaming down her face, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The music had taken over, and she was just along for the ride. The final notes rang out, slow and haunting, fading into silence. Priya's hands fell to her lap. She sat there, breathing hard, her heart pounding in her chest. The auditorium was completely still. For a long, terrible moment, she thought she had made a mistake. She thought Mrs. Burton was going to tell her it was not good enough, that she was not what they were looking for. Then she heard a sound. It was quiet at first, almost inaudible, but it grew louder, and Priya realized what it was. Mrs. Burton was crying. She was sitting in the front row, tears rolling down her cheeks, her hand pressed over her mouth. She looked like someone who had just witnessed something impossible. Slowly, she stood up. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking against the floor. When she reached the edge of the stage, she stopped and looked up at Priya with an expression that was hard to read. There was shock in her eyes, and wonder, and something that looked almost like guilt. "Priya," she said, her voice trembling. "Where have you been hiding?" Priya did not know how to answer. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her own tears. Mrs. Burton climbed the steps to the stage and stood beside the piano. She was shaking her head slowly, like she still could not believe what she had just heard. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I looked right past you. I assumed you had nothing to offer because you were quiet, because you did not speak up. That was wrong of me." Priya looked down at the piano keys. "It is okay," she whispered. "No, it is not okay," Mrs. Burton said firmly. "You have an extraordinary gift. One of the most extraordinary I have ever seen. And I almost let it slip through my fingers because I was not paying attention." She paused, studying Priya's face. "How long have you been playing like this?" "Since I was 5, Priya said softly. "My grandmother taught me." "You have been practicing alone all this time? No lessons? No performances?" Priya nodded. "I do not like playing in front of people. It makes me scared." Mrs. Burton sat down on the edge of the stage, her legs dangling over the side. She looked tired, but there was a new energy in her eyes. "I understand," she said. "Believe it or not, I used to be shy too. When I was your age, I was terrified of performing. I would shake so badly that I could barely hold my violin." Priya looked up, surprised. She could not imagine Mrs. Burton being afraid of anything. "But here's what I learned," Mrs. Burton continued. "Fear does not go away. You do not wake up one day and suddenly feel brave. You just learn to do the thing anyway, even when you are scared. And the more you do it, the easier it gets." She reached out and put a hand on Priya's shoulder. "You played beautifully just now. Even with the fear. Even with the nerves. That tells me you are stronger than you think." Priya felt a lump forming in her throat. No one had ever talked to her like this before. No one except Nani. "The Spring Talent Assembly is in 2 weeks," Mrs. Burton said. "I want you to be our closing act." The piano solo. Will you do it? The question hung in the air. Priya's stomach twisted. 2 weeks. Hundreds of people. The whole school, watching. She thought about all the times she had imagined being invisible forever. All the times she had convinced herself that hiding was safer than being seen. She thought about her grandmother and the promise she had made to herself after Nani died. Never play for anyone again. Keep the music private. Keep it safe. But sitting here now, with the echo of the ballad still ringing in her ears, she realized something. The music was not meant to be kept in a box. It was not meant to be hidden away in an empty apartment. It was meant to be shared. It was meant to be heard. Nani had known that. That was why she had taught Priya to play in the first place. Not so she could hide, but so she could shine. Priya took a deep breath. Her voice came out small, but steady. Okay, she said. I will do it. Mrs. Burton smiled. It was the first real smile Priya had ever seen on her face. Good, she said. We are going to make this work. I will help you prepare. We will practice every day after school if we need to. By the time that assembly comes, you are going to be ready. Priya nodded, but inside, she was not so sure. The audition had been hard enough, and there had only been one person watching. How was she going to play in front of the entire school? But she had said yes. She had made a commitment. And for the first time in 3 years, she was going to stop hiding. That night, when she got home, her mother was already there. She was sitting on the couch, still wearing her scrubs, looking exhausted but happy. You were home early, Priya said, surprised. Her mother smiled. I switched shifts. I wanted to see you. Priya sat down beside her, unsure how to start. She had never talked to her mother about the piano. Not really. It had always been something she did alone, something that belonged only to her and Nani. But tonight felt different. Tonight something had changed. Mom, she said quietly. I have to tell you something. Her mother turned to look at her, concern flickering in her eyes. What is it, Beta? Priya took a deep breath. I am going to play piano at the school talent show, in front of everyone. For a moment her mother just stared at her. Then her face broke into the biggest smile Priya had ever seen. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pulled Priya into a tight hug. Oh, my girl, she whispered. Your Nani would be so proud. Priya buried her face in her mother's shoulder and let the tears come. She cried for her grandmother. She cried for all the years she had spent hiding. She cried for the terrified girl who had frozen at the piano, and for the brave girl who had played anyway. When she finally pulled back, her mother cupped her face in her hands. I will be there, she said. Front row? I would not miss it for the world. Priya smiled through her tears. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel so alone. The next 2 weeks were going to be the hardest of her life. But she was ready to face them. She had a promise to keep, the night of the spring. Talent assembly arrived faster than Priya expected. She stood backstage, hidden behind the heavy curtain, listening to the sounds of the auditorium filling up. Voices, laughter, the scraping of chairs. Hundreds of people were out there, finding their seats, waiting for the show to begin. Priya felt like she was going to be sick. Her hands were ice cold. Her heart was beating so fast, she could feel it in her throat. She had practiced every single day for the past 2 weeks. She knew the piece by heart. She could play it in her sleep. But knowing something and doing it in front of a crowd were two very different things. She peeked through a gap in the curtain and immediately regretted it. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was taken. Parents lined the back walls, holding up phones to record. Teachers sat in the front rows, chatting with each other. Students filled the middle sections, loud and restless and ready to be entertained. Priya pulled back from the curtain, her stomach churning. The show began. One by one, the performers took the stage. A group of girls did a dance routine. A boy played guitar and sang a popular song. 2 students performed a comedy skit that made the audience roar with laughter. Each act received loud applause, and each round of clapping made Priya's anxiety grow stronger. She was the closing act, the final performance, the one everyone would remember. What if she froze again? What if she forgot the notes? What if she made a fool of herself in front of the entire school? A hand touched her shoulder, and she jumped. It was Kavya. She had snuck backstage to find her. "Okay," Kavya said softly. "How are you doing?" Priya shook her head. "I cannot do this. I thought I could, but I cannot. There are so many people out there." Kavya took both of Priya's hands in hers. "Look at me," she said. Priya looked up, her eyes wet with tears. "You are the most talented person I know," Kavya said. "I have heard you play 100 times through that wall, and every single time it takes my breath away. Those people out there have no idea what they are about to witness. But I do. And I am telling you, Priya, you are going to be incredible." Priya wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel brave, but the fear was so big, so overwhelming, that it felt impossible to push through. "Your grandmother is watching," Kavya whispered. "I really believe that. She is right here with you. Play for her." Something about those words broke through the panic. Priya closed her eyes and thought of Nani. She thought of all those afternoons at the piano, learning and laughing and making mistakes together. She thought of her grandmother's hands guiding hers, her voice saying, "You have magic in your hands." She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. "Okay," she said quietly. "I am ready." Kavya hugged her tight. "I will be in the front row, right next to your mom. We are going to cheer so loud." Then she slipped back through the curtain and disappeared into the audience. A few minutes later, the stage manager appeared. "You are up next," she said. "Get ready." Priya's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward the stage entrance. The act before her finished, and the audience clapped. The principal walked to the microphone and announced the final performance. "And now, for our closing act, please welcome Priya, who will be performing a piano solo." There was a smattering of polite applause. Priya heard a few whispers ripple through the crowd. She knew what people were thinking. The quiet girl? The one who never talks? She is going to play piano? She stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. She could barely see the audience, just a sea of dark shapes and glowing phone screens. Her footsteps echoed as she walked toward the grand piano in the center of the stage. Someone in the crowd snickered. She heard a voice whisper, "This should be interesting." Priya sat down on the bench. Her hands were trembling as she placed them on the keys. The auditorium fell silent, waiting. For a moment, she could not move. The fear was back, pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. She stared at the black and white keys, and they blurred in front of her eyes. Then she heard it, a single voice from the front row. "You got this, Beta?" Her mother, Priya, looked up and found her in the crowd. Her mother was sitting right where she had promised. Front row center, her hands clasped together, her eyes shining with love and pride. Next to her was Kavya. Smiling and giving her a thumbs up, Priya felt something warm spread through her chest. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother one last time. "Play for me, little bird," and she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No One drifted into the silence. Soft, gentle, like a whisper, the snickering stopped. The whispers died. The entire auditorium went completely still. Priya's fingers moved across the keys, and the music poured out of her. She was not thinking about the audience anymore. She was not thinking about the fear or the doubt or the years she had spent hiding. She was just playing. She was just feeling. She was letting the music speak for her, saying all the things she had never been able to say out loud. The piece built in intensity, the melody rising and falling like waves. Priya swayed with the rhythm, her whole body moving with the music. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop. She played through the pain and the grief and the loneliness. She played for her grandmother. She played for herself. The climax came crashing in, powerful and overwhelming. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note with perfect precision. The sound filled the auditorium, echoing off the walls, wrapping around everyone in the room. And then, slowly, the music softened. The final notes rang out, delicate and haunting, fading into silence. Priya lifted her hands from the keys. She sat there, breathing hard, her heart pounding. The auditorium was completely silent. For one terrible second, she thought she had failed. She thought everyone was going to laugh or walk out or pretend it. It never happened. Then someone started clapping. It was her mother. Standing up in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Clapping as hard as she could, Kavya jumped to her feet beside her. Cheering, and then like a wave, the rest of the audience followed. One by one, people stood up. The applause grew louder and louder until it was thunderous, filling every corner of the room. Students who had never spoken to Priya were on their feet, whistling and cheering. Teachers were wiping their eyes. Parents were turning to each other in disbelief. A standing ovation, Priya sat at the piano, overwhelmed, unable to move. She had dreamed of this moment 1,000 times. She had never believed it could actually happen. She looked out at the sea of faces, at all the people who were finally seeing her, finally hearing her, and for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. She was not invisible anymore. She had found her voice, and it was beautiful.